Why did his voice tremble when he said, "Any jet will do"? Commander Brooks wasn't known for hesitation. 12 years with the SEALs had carved steel into his tone, sharpened him into a man who never flinched under fire. And yet, as he pressed the radio against his lips that morning in the mountains of Afghanistan, something inside him whispered a truth he refused to say aloud. Maybe this was the end. The ridge they were trapped on was unforgiving, sharp rock, thin air, heat rising even in early morning below them. Shadows moved, dozens at first, then hundreds, enemy fighters crawling across the mountain like ants closing in on spilled sugar, 200 men against 6. It was no longer a question of whether they would be found. They had already been marked. Brooks's mind replayed the mistake in brutal clarity. A footprint, just one careless print near the creek bed where one of his men had filled a canteen, a smudge in soft dirt that should have been brushed away, forgotten by wind or water, but no. An enemy tracker had seen it, read it like scripture, and sounded the alarm within minutes. A hornet's nest had erupted, radios crackled, fighters mobilized, and the silence of the mountains broke under the echo of war drums. Now Brooks and his men were pinned, huddled on a rocky outcropping. The position gave them vision, yes, fields of fire in 3 directions. But vision meant nothing against waves of hostiles who knew how to fight, who advanced not like reckless insurgents but like soldiers trained, disciplined, deliberate. "Command, this is SEAL Team Delta," Brooks whispered into his mic, keeping his eyes on the slope. "We're surrounded, hostiles 200 plus. Grid coordinates 41 South Mountain, 12345678890, requesting immediate extraction." Static, then a voice, calm, detached, too calm. "SEAL Team Delta, nearest extraction assets are 45 minutes out. Can you maintain position until support arrives?" 45 minutes, Brooks closed his eyes. 45 hours, it might as well have been. He glanced at his men. Martinez already steadying his marksman rifle. Stevens crouched low with his M4, watching the south with grim silence. 6 men. 300 rounds each, grenades, demolitions, enough for harassment, not for a war. "No chance," Brooks muttered, then pressed the transmit. "Negative, command, 45 won't hold. We need air support now. Any jet will do." The words hung in the air. Any jet. He didn't care if it was a lumbering bomber, a sleek F-16, or a helicopter gunship limping with one rotor. They just needed fire in the sky, something. Anything to slow the storm about to break over them. "Copy that, SEAL Team Delta," came the reply. "Stand by for coordination. Air asset inbound. Call sign Venom 17, A-10 Thunderbolt, ETA 5 minutes. The A-10, the Warthog. Brooks felt a small jolt of hope pierce through the fog in his chest. The aircraft was ugly, brutal, terrifying, and built for exactly this: close air support, protecting soldiers who were seconds away from being overrun. But 5 minutes was an eternity, and in those minutes the enemy surged. "Movement north slope," Martinez barked through his scope. He tracked fighters weaving between boulders, firing suppressive bursts to cover their advance. They weren't amateurs, their spacing was disciplined, their coordination tight. "East side 30 plus," Stevens shouted. Brooks pivoted, scanning the jagged line of rocks where silhouettes flickered in and out, every movement precise, every shadow pushing closer. Brooks's throat tightened. Whoever trained these men knew Western doctrine. They weren't swarming like villagers with rifles. They were maneuvering like infantry, cover fire, leapfrog movement, communication on radios. This wasn't chaos. It was a hunt. And Brooks's team was the prey. He keyed his mic again, urgency edging his voice. "Command, we're danger close. Hostiles advancing from multiple fronts with superior firepower. Confirm Venom 17 inbound." "Affirmative," the reply came. "Venom 17 has visual, stand by for contact." Then, for the first time that day, Brooks heard it. The sound wasn't just noise. It was a promise. A deep, snarling roar rolling across the mountains, low, guttural, metallic thunder, the sound of a machine built for one purpose: to keep men like him alive. Brooks's men raised their heads, eyes flicking skyward, and then they saw her. The A-10 cut across the silver against the burning sky, wings wide, nose down, descending not with caution but with hunger. She wasn't creeping, wasn't calculating. She was diving, aggressive, reckless, alive. SEAL Team Delta, this is Venom 17, came the voice over comms. A voice unlike what Brooks expected, calm, firm, but higher, female. For a split second, the team froze. A woman. Brooks had flown with dozens of A-10 pilots over his career. Not once had the voice been female. This is Delta, Brooks answered, keeping the surprise out of his tone. Priority targets. Enemy concentrations north and east, danger close, friendlies on rocky outcropping. Copy that, Delta, she replied. No hesitation, no waver. Beginning attack run, keep your heads down. Then the world split open. The A-10 roared into a dive so steep Brooks swore she'd slam into the mountain. Then the cannon spoke. The GAU-8 Avenger. 7 barrels spitting fire at 3,900 rounds a minute. A growl so deep it rattled bones. The rounds tore into the northern slope. Precision bursts, controlled, each impact erupting into dust, rock, bodies flung into the air. Fighters who moments ago moved with discipline now scattered like startled animals. Holy hell, Stevens whispered, eyes wide. She's flying like she's invincible. But she wasn't reckless. Brooks saw it instantly. Every burst was measured, exact, placed within meters of their position, yet never too close. She wasn't guessing, she knew she had control. The A-10 pulled out of its dive, banking so low Brooks could see the heat shimmer off its engines. Then, without pause, it disappeared behind a ridge only to reappear seconds later, screaming in from the east. Delta, this is Venom 17, beginning second attack run, danger close. Again the roar, again the earth split. Fighters who had taken cover behind boulders were shredded, their protection meaningless. She used the terrain itself, masking her approach, striking from angles that gave the enemy no time to react. It wasn't just flying, it was art painted in fire. Brooks murmured over comms, I've never seen flying like this. She's running that hog like it's a fighter jet. Brooks gritted his teeth, heart hammering. He wanted to believe this was luck, adrenaline, desperation, but it wasn't. He could see the precision, the calculation in every move, whoever this pilot was. She wasn't just skilled. She was rewriting what the warthog could do. Minutes stretched like lifetimes. Each pass shattered enemy formations, scattered survivors, bought precious seconds of breathing room. The ridge that had felt like a coffin was now an altar to survival. Each cannon burst a prayer answered in steel. Delta, this is Venom 17. Her voice finally came, calm as ever. Enemy activity minimal in your sector. Can you move to extraction coordinates? Brooks exhaled, only now realizing how long he'd been holding his breath. He glanced at his men, who were already gathering gear, faces pale but alive. Copy Venom, Brooks said. Outstanding support, we're moving. Request you maintain overwatch until extraction complete. Affirmative, Delta, I'll watch your backs. And she did for 20 more minutes, while the SEALs moved through rough terrain toward the landing zone. The A-10 circled above, a guardian angel with tusks of iron. Extraction birds came. The team lifted, and only then did Venom 17 peel away, disappearing into the horizon as quietly as she had arrived. On the flight back, Brooks sat in silence. His men dozed, adrenaline draining into exhaustion, but Brooks couldn't rest. His thoughts kept circling back, not to the enemy they had faced, not to the mistake of that single footprint, but to the voice on the radio. Female, calm, professional, unflinching. He'd seen dozens of A-10 pilots, hardened men who carried their reputations like armor, but whoever she was, she'd flown with a style so raw, so fearless. It had turned the tide of a battle no one else would have survived. Brooks keyed his mic, still unsettled. Command, Delta, can you provide pilot information for Venom 17? Would like to extend personal thanks. A pause then. Copy Delta, Venom 17 is Captain Riley Carter, call sign Venom, 354th Fighter Squadron. She'll return to base 30 minutes after your arrival. Brooks leaned back, staring at the black sky beyond the helicopter door. Riley Carter. A name that meant nothing to him, not yet, but already it carried weight. Because sometimes survival wasn't just about firepower, or numbers, or training. Sometimes it came down to the one person no one expected. And Brooks knew one thing for certain: he had to meet her. Why did he freeze at the runway? Commander Brooks had seen hundreds of pilots dismount their aircraft, some swaggered, some staggered. Some carried the weight of losses you could feel before they even took off their helmet. But when the A-10 Thunderbolt rolled to a stop and its canopy lifted with a hiss, Brooks felt something he hadn't expected: hesitation. She climbed out with calm efficiency, hands steady as she checked her aircraft, boots hitting the tarmac with the certainty of someone who belonged there. No theatrics, no flourish, just muscle memory, ritual, control. Her helmet tucked under one arm, her flight suit stained by hours of sweat and dust. Captain Riley Carter looked like anyone else on that line, but Brooks's throat tightened, because the truth of what he had witnessed hours earlier didn't fit the woman standing in front of him. He had expected a grizzled veteran, a man with scars, maybe hair at the edges, someone who looked carved from the same stone as the aircraft they flew. Instead, Carter looked almost ordinary, late 20s, unassuming, the kind of person you'd pass in a hallway without a second glance. Except Brooks couldn't stop staring. "Captain Carter," he said finally, stepping forward. She looked up, sharp blue eyes catching his. No flicker of intimidation, no nervous smile, just recognition. "Commander Brooks, SEAL Team Delta." Her voice matched the one on the radio, calm, steady. "That's right," he said. "I wanted to thank you personally. You saved 6 lives today." Her shoulders lifted slightly, a shrug more than a gesture. "Just doing my job, sir. Glad you made it out." There it was again. That refusal to claim the moment. She didn't own it, didn't bask in the praise, didn't even acknowledge the extraordinary nature of what she had done. And somehow, that modesty made the memory of her flying burn even brighter. Brooks studied her face. She was young, younger than most who flew combat sorties like the one she'd just pulled off. There was no bravado, no cockiness, just responsibility, and beneath it, a hint of something else, something he couldn't yet name. "You've got to know," Brooks pressed, lowering his voice. "I've worked with a lot of hog pilots. I've never seen anyone fly like that, those attack runs. You weren't just aggressive, you were surgical. Where'd you learn to fight that way?" For the first time, she seemed uncomfortable. She shifted, glanced back at her aircraft, then answered with the restraint of someone used to deflecting questions. "Sir, the A-10 was built for close air support. I used the aircraft's capabilities the way it was designed." That wasn't the truth, not all of it. Brooks knew it. He'd seen dozens of A-10s. He'd watched good men and women deliver textbook fire. But what Riley Carter had done wasn't in the manuals. It was instinct, fearless, personal. He let it go for now, but the question lodged in his chest. "Who are you, Carter?" Later in the debriefing tent, the team's adrenaline had drained into exhaustion. Martinez leaned back, eyes closed, but his words carried sharp reverence. "That pilot, Jesus, Brooks, she flew like she was inside our heads, like she knew where every one of us was without looking." Stevens, usually the loud one, only shook his head. "I thought we were done, when I saw them moving from the east. I figured that was it. Then she came screaming over the ridge. I'll hear that sound in my sleep." Sat quietly, polishing his rifle, but when he finally spoke, it was softer than Brooks expected. "Didn't think I'd live to see another sunrise. She gave me that. Hard to explain what that does to a man." Brooks said nothing. He listened. He let their voices fill the tent, men trying to process survival when their bodies were still wired for death. But his mind wasn't in the tent. It was still back on the tarmac, staring at Carter's calm eyes. hearing her voice echo through the static. She'd been questioned, he realized. He'd caught it in her tone. The way she flinched when he mentioned her flying, someone somewhere, had told her she didn't belong. Maybe many had, and her response had been written in fire across a mountainside. That night Brooks couldn't sleep. The base was quiet, the desert air cold, but his mind replayed the mission in loops. The footprint, the encirclement, the call for extraction, and then the cannon, the dive, the impossible flying. But beneath all of that was something deeper, the memory of hesitation in his own voice when he'd said, "Any jet will do." He had been desperate. He hadn't believed salvation was coming, and yet it had come, through someone no one expected. In the weeks that followed, missions blurred, recon, infiltration, extraction, each one layered over the last until the days lost their edges. But Brooks found himself scanning the sky differently now. When the call for close air support came, when the radio crackled with the familiar static, he listened. Not just for the call sign, but for her. Venom 17. Sometimes she appeared, sometimes she didn't. When she did, the battlefield changed. The men knew it. You could see it in their shoulders. The way their eyes lifted when her voice came over comms. Confidence spread through the team like oxygen, steadying hands, slowing heartbeats. And slowly, Brooks realized something dangerous. He trusted her more than he trusted almost anyone else. But trust was one thing, understanding was another, and the mystery gnawed at him. How had a woman so young, so unassuming, risen into the kind of pilot who redefined what her aircraft could do? What had she sacrificed? What had it cost her to walk onto flight lines where whispers must have followed, where doubt hung in the air like smog? He wanted to ask, he wanted to know. But every time he saw her, she carried herself with the same modesty, the same refusal to be drawn into talk of skill or reputation. To her, it was the mission, always the mission. And that was when Brooks began to wonder, was that her armor? The first crack showed one night after another sortie. The team had been pinned near a valley mouth. Enemy fire thick enough to turn the air into dust. Carter had flown 3 passes, each one threading the needle between safety and suicide, and saved them again. Back at the hangar, Brooks found her by her jet, crouched low, running her hands across the landing gear as if she could feel the stress the airframe had taken. "You all right, Captain?" he asked. She looked up startled, then nodded too quickly. "Fine, sir, just post-flight checks." But her eyes betrayed her. Not fear, not pride, something heavier, something she didn't want him to see. "Captain," Brooks said quietly, "you're flying tonight. It was beyond the call. You didn't just do your job. You kept us alive when no one else could." She straightened, helmet in hand. "Sir, if I start thinking about it that way, I won't fly the same tomorrow. I can't afford that, none of us can." And with that, she turned and walked away, her boots echoing on the concrete, her back straight, her steps deliberate. Brooks stood there, watching her disappear into the night, realizing that maybe the mystery wasn't meant to be solved. Maybe some people carried burdens too heavy to share, and their strength came from refusing to put them down. Still, he couldn't shake the thought. She was more than a pilot, more than a savior in the sky. She was a question. And one day, he would need the answer. What makes someone fly like they have nothing left to lose? That question stalked Brooks through every mission after that day on the mountain. He had seen courage before. Reckless, heroic, foolish. But Captain Riley Carter's courage was different. It was quiet, surgical, measured. And yet it burned brighter than anything he had witnessed in a dozen years of combat. She flew like the sky itself, was hers to command. And Brooks couldn't forget the look on her face when he thanked her, the way her eyes shifted, the way her shoulders carried something invisible, a weight not of pride, but of silence. Weeks turned into months, and their paths crossed again and again. Sometimes fate put her above his team's battles. Sometimes it didn't, but when she was there, the outcome changed. It wasn't long before the others started to notice. "Brooks," Martinez muttered one evening as they cleaned weapons, I've been thinking, what if she hadn't shown up that day? What if it was some other pilot by the book, flying safe runs from high altitude? We'd be dead. Stevens nodded, his voice unusually subdued. She didn't just drop fire, she understood us like she was reading the ground through our eyes. How does someone do that? Brooks didn't answer. He didn't know, but the question gnawed at him too. The truth came into sharper focus during a joint briefing a month later. The room was dim, maps projected onto a canvas, officers murmuring as plans were drawn for a high-risk operation in a valley where enemy fighters had entrenched themselves. Air support would be essential. Brooks sat quietly in the corner, his team at his side. Then the door opened, she walked in, Captain Riley Carter. For a moment the room shifted. Some eyes tracked her with curiosity, others with something colder. Brooks caught it. The slight arch of a colonel's brow, the faint smirk from another pilot at the back, doubt. It hung heavy, unspoken but sharp. She moved to the front, unbothered, carrying her notes with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times. Intel suggests heavy machine gun emplacements along the here and here, she said, her voice clear. I'll use terrain masking to approach from the west, minimize exposure, then roll into a danger-close run to clear the valley mouth before ground teams insert. One of the older pilots scoffed softly, not quite under his breath. Danger-close runs on that terrain. Sounds reckless. The room stilled. Brooks felt heat rise in his chest, reckless. He wanted to shout. She had saved 6 lives with exactly that kind of run, but Carter didn't flinch. She simply met the man's eyes and answered evenly. Reckless is failing to keep them alive, sir. The silence that followed was heavy. Brooks almost smiled, almost. After the briefing, he caught up with her outside. You didn't even blink, he said quietly. She glanced at him, then back down the corridor. If I blink every time someone doubts me, I won't see where I'm going. There it was again. That armor, worn smooth, invisible, but strong enough to hold back a tide of skepticism. She didn't fight it with anger. She fought it with proof. But proof came at a cost. Brooks saw it that night after the mission, when her A-10 returned with bullet holes, its fuselage riddled with evidence of how close she had flown. She climbed out, calm as ever, but her hands trembled slightly as she removed her gloves. He approached. You all right, Captain? She hesitated, then nodded, too quickly. Fine, standard sortie. But Brooks wasn't convinced. He recognized the shake of hands that had held life and death too close. He felt it himself after firefights that lasted too long, after silence fell heavy on too many empty casings. It wasn't fear. It was the body remembering survival. That night, while others slept, Brooks found himself staring at the ceiling of his quarters, thinking of her again. Why did it bother him so much? The way she carried everything alone. Why did her silence feel heavier than the roar of her cannon? The answer came weeks later, in the form of a conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. Brooks was walking past the hangar when he caught 2 young pilots talking, voices low, careless. Carter pulled another close run last night. Word is she threaded a pass 20 meters from friendlies. Insane. Insane or desperate to prove she belongs. The other replied, everyone knows she only got the hog because the squadron was short. She wasn't cut out for it, not like the others. Brooks stopped cold, anger tightening his fists. He wanted to step in, shut them up with the truth, but he forced himself to walk past, silent. Words wouldn't fix ignorance. Carter's flying already had. Still, the sting of their doubt lodged deep in him. He thought of her eyes, the way they flickered whenever someone questioned her place. She had heard these whispers before, too many times, and still she flew. That night Brooks sat by the fire pit outside their quarters. The desert wind was sharp, carrying sand through the flames, broke the silence. You've been thinking about her, he said flatly. Brooks raised a brow. What makes you say that? Smirked faintly. Because you've got that look, same one you had after the valley op in Helmand, when you couldn't stop thinking about the sniper who covered our flank. You get stuck on people who change how you see things. Brooks didn't deny it, he only said, "She's different." Poked at the fire. Different doesn't survive long out here unless it's stronger than the rest. The words lingered, stronger than the rest, maybe that was it. Carter wasn't fighting the enemy alone. She was fighting her own ranks, her own doubts, every sideways glance. And every time she strapped into that hog, she answered not with words but with fire. But fire consumed. Brooks knew it, and he began to fear that one day her need to prove herself, to everyone, maybe even to herself, would burn too hot. He got his first glimpse of that fear weeks later. It was supposed to be a standard support mission. His team moving into a valley to clear an enemy supply route. Carter on overwatch, routine. But nothing in Afghanistan stayed routine. An ambush triggered before they reached the valley mouth. Gunfire raked the slopes, RPGs screamed overhead. The world erupted in chaos. Brooks dropped into cover, shouting orders, his men returning fire, but the numbers, always the numbers, were against them, dozens, maybe more. "Delta, this is Venom 17, Carter's voice cracked over comms. "I've got visual, hang on." Brooks's heart lifted, but as the minutes dragged on, he realized something. Her voice was different, not calm, not steady, faster. Her A-10 screamed in low, cannon roaring, shredding enemy formations. But her maneuvers were sharper than usual, her dives steeper, her passes closer, too close. Brooks felt dust sting his face as rounds impacted meters from their position. "Venom, danger close. Pull back, you're cutting it too fine," he shouted. No reply, just another pass, even lower, even fiercer, tearing the enemy apart but rattling his men to the core. When it was over, when the dust settled and the valley fell silent, Brooks keyed his mic again. "Venom, report status." Her reply came, breathless, "All clear, you're safe." But Brooks knew something had cracked. Later that night, he found her by her hog again. She was sitting on the wheel well, helmet on the ground beside her, staring at nothing. "You nearly killed us today," Brooks said quietly. Her eyes flicked to him, tired. "And I saved you." "At what cost, Captain?" She didn't answer, not immediately, then softly. "Do you know what it's like to be told you can't handle something, over and over? To have to prove it every time you climb into the cockpit, every time you breathe. If I don't fly like that, they'll say they were right." Brooks stood there, silence heavy between them. He wanted to tell her she didn't need to prove anything, that her flying spoke louder than words ever could. But he also knew, sometimes silence was armor, and armor couldn't be stripped away by comfort. So he only said, "Just don't let proving them wrong kill you, because you're more than a point to make." Her eyes softened then, just slightly, a flicker of something vulnerable beneath the steel. "Maybe, but out there, it feels like that's all I am." Brooks didn't sleep that night, because for the first time, he realized the truth. Her greatest strength was also the blade pressed against her throat. And if she wasn't careful, one day it would cut too deep. What drives someone to the edge of the impossible and keeps them there? Brooks asked himself that question as the helicopter blades thudded overhead, carrying his team toward another mission. The desert below was endless, a sea of shadows and ridges, every valley a trap waiting to be sprung. Beside him, Stevens adjusted his headset, muttering a prayer under his breath, sat rigid, eyes fixed forward. Martinez checked his rifle. Movements deliberate, ritualistic, 6 men again, always 6 against hundreds, and Brooks their anchor. But his mind wasn't on the mission briefing, it was on her. "Captain Riley Carter, Venom 17. Her words echoed still. "If I don't fly like that, they'll say they were right." The weight of it pressed on him. He knew what it was to be doubted. Every SEAL did. But the way she carried it, day after day, alone in the cockpit, pulling the sky down around her like a shield, it was different. He feared where it would lead. The helicopter banked, dipping low as the pilot spoke over comms. "2 mics to LZ, good hunting, Delta." Brooks forced himself back into the moment, Focus, mission first, always. They were tasked with intercepting a high-value courier. Intel suggested he carried data drives linking insurgent cells to foreign backers. Capture was the goal, extraction critical, but Intel also warned enemy forces would defend him heavily. The insertion went smooth. Too smooth, the night was clear, stars sharp against the black sky. They moved silently across jagged terrain, reaching the valley floor where the courier's convoy was expected. Hours passed, shadows stretched, no convoy. Then a sound, engines, dim headlights bouncing across the dirt track. Brooks signaled, his team fanning out into hidden positions. The convoy rolled in 3 trucks, armed fighters in the beds, weapons ready at the center. A vehicle armored more heavily, the courier. Brooks exhaled slowly, lifted his hand, then froze. From the above movement, too many shapes, fighters, and ambush. Contact East Ridge, Martinez hissed. Gunfire erupted, tracers carved the night. The valley became a cage of fire. Command, this is Delta. We're compromised, enemy strength 60+, request immediate support. Brooks shouted over the chaos. The reply came, sharp and steady. Delta, Venom 17 is wheels up, ETA 6 minutes. His chest tightened. 6 minutes in a valley against 60 was suicide. But then again, so was everything they did. They fought to hold, weapons spitting light, grenades bursting against the slope. But the enemy pressed harder, disciplined as always, cutting angles, surrounding. Stevens grunted as rounds pinged dangerously close, dirt spraying his face, fired until his rifle steamed in the cool air. Then came the sound. Low, guttural, like thunder tearing through the night, the A-10. Brooks felt relief ripple through his chest, but it was short-lived. He knew Carter, he knew how she flew, and this valley, the angles, the cliffs, the narrow gaps, was a coffin waiting for her. Delta, Venom 17, her voice cut in, calm but firm. I've got your position, multiple concentrations east and north. Danger close runs inbound, mark your perimeter. Venom copy, Brooks replied, marking their position with IR strobes. But be advised, this valley's tight, stay high, don't risk it. Silence, then her reply softer. If I stay high, you're dead. And then she dove. The roar of the Avenger cannon split the night, fire ripping into the East Ridge, fighters scattered, dust boiling upward. She pulled up barely in time, skimming vanishing into darkness, only to reappear seconds later from the north, rolling into another run. Her passes were than ever, threading through terrain that left no margin for error. Every burst shook the earth around the seals, carving gaps through enemy lines just wide enough to breathe. Jesus, Stevens gasped between shots, she's flying like the valley belongs to her. But Brooks saw more. He saw the way her runs cut closer each time, the margin shrinking. She wasn't just saving them. She was daring the valley to take her. The battle raged for 20 minutes, each pass of her hog the difference between survival and annihilation. By the end, the convoy was disabled, the courier captured, enemy fighters broken and retreating. The SEALs exfiltrated under her watchful cover, the helicopter whisking them into the night, but Brooks's relief didn't last. Back at base, he went straight to the flight line. Carter's A-10 rolled in, smoking from small arms fire, its fuselage peppered with holes. She climbed down, movement steady, but when her boots touched the ground, she staggered slightly, catching herself on the ladder. Brooks rushed forward. You pushed it too far tonight. She pulled off her helmet, sweat plastering hair to her forehead. You're alive, aren't you? That's not the point, he snapped. You can't keep flying like you're proving something. You're not invincible. Her eyes flashed, anger, hurt, maybe both. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I don't feel every round that punches through my bird? Every time I strap in, I know it could be the last, but if I hold back, if I hesitate, your men die, you die. Brooks stared at her, chest heaving. For a moment neither spoke. The night stretched, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally her voice softened. You asked me once where I learned to fly like this. Truth is, it wasn't training, it wasn't manuals, it was failure. Brooks frowned. Failure. She looked away, eyes distant. First deployment, different unit, different team on the ground. I flew safe that night, textbook, high passes, cautious angles. By the time I cleared the target, they were gone, every last one. I told myself I followed procedure. But it didn't matter, 6 men died because I hesitated. Her words hung heavy, sharper than any bullet. Brooks felt them sink into him. That's why, she whispered. That's why I fly the way I do, because I won't let it happen again, not while I'm in the sky. Brooks exhaled slowly, the weight of her confession pressing against his chest. He wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that war took lives no matter how hard you fought, but he knew those words wouldn't matter. She had already built her vow, carved it into her bones. Instead, he said quietly, "You carry them with you." Her eyes met his, glassy under the floodlights, every day. For the first time, Brooks understood. Her silence wasn't modesty, it was grief. Her recklessness wasn't bravado, it was penance. And suddenly, the roar of her cannon sounded different in his memory. Not just fire, not just salvation, but apology. Over and over, written in the sky. That night, Brooks sat alone, staring into the desert beyond the wire. He thought of his own ghosts, the men he hadn't been able to save, the mistakes that haunted him, but hers. Hers were heavier because every time she flew, she carried them back into battle, daring death to come take her instead. And he realized something then. If she kept flying like that, one day death would accept the dare. What happens when a vow becomes a cage? Brooks thought about that question as he studied the mission briefing laid out across the table, the maps, the satellite images, the scribbled notes in the margins. All of it pointed to one conclusion. This was going to be bad. The target was a fortified compound deep in the mountains, dug into the rock like a parasite. Intelligence suggested stockpiles of weapons, communications gear, maybe even a training hub for foreign fighters. Dozens of enemy combatants, maybe hundreds, extraction routes minimal. And his team, 6 men again, would be tasked with infiltration, confirmation, and withdrawal. It was already a suicide mission on paper. And yet, Brooks knew there was only one reason he wasn't walking away. Because air support had been promised. And not just any support, Venom 17. Captain Riley Carter. He should have felt relief. She had saved them before, time and again. She'd turned death into survival, but instead he felt a knot in his chest. Because now he knew the truth. She flew the way she did not out of confidence, but out of grief, out of guilt. And he feared this mission might demand more of her than she had left to give. Still, he kept his silence. His men needed certainty, not doubt. The insertion came before dawn, shadows long across the jagged terrain. They moved silently, every step calculated for hours. The valley seemed empty, almost too still. Then the silence broke. Crackles of movement, distant engines, voices carried on the wind. They spotted the compound at first light, larger than expected. Towers built into the rock, fighters patrolling with radios clipped to their chests, their movements disciplined. Brooks studied through binoculars, his jaw tightening. Intel had underestimated again. This wasn't just a base, it was a fortress. "Command, this is Delta," he whispered into comms. "Visual on compound, enemy strength heavy, request confirmation on air asset." "Copy Delta, Venom 17 is airborne, ETA 10 minutes. 10 minutes, the same eternity as before. They didn't have 10 minutes. A shout rang from below, an enemy sentry, eyes catching the faint glint of glass from a scope. Alarm erupted. The compound came alive, fighters pouring out, weapons raised. "Contact north approach," Martinez barked. Gunfire ripped the air, bullets chewed through rock, sparks dancing. The SEALs returned fire, but the sheer number, dozens already, more pouring out, was overwhelming. Brooks ducked as a round snapped past his ear. He keyed his mic, shouting over the chaos, "Venom, we need you now. We're exposed." Her voice came back, steady but sharp. On approach, hold your position. Hold as if holding was possible. They were pinned against the slope, outnumbered. The compound spitting fire like a nest of hornets. Then the sky growled. Her hog came screaming in low, diving straight into the hail of tracers. The cannon thundered, tearing through fighters, ripping craters into defensive positions. Dust boiled upward, men scattering. But she didn't climb, didn't pull out to safety. She cut her path dangerously close, banking sharp, her wingtips skimming the venom too low, Brooks shouted instinctively. Her reply was cold, not low enough. She dove again, each pass, each burst closer. The A-10 shuddered under fire, tracers clawing at its fuselage. Still she pressed, as if daring the enemy to take her down. Brooks's heart pounded. He'd seen bravery, he'd seen madness. He didn't know which this was anymore. On the ground, the SEALs pressed their advantage. Moving through the chaos, she carved open. Explosions rocked the compound. Fighters broke, retreating under the relentless storm from above. But then a sound Brooks hadn't heard before. A sharp crack, followed by a plume of smoke trailing from her hog. "Venom report," Brooks barked. "I'm hit," she replied, voice still steady. "Hydraulics compromised, still flying." Brooks's throat tightened. She was bleeding in the sky, and still she circled, still she made another pass, guns blazing, refusing to let go. "Venom, pull out," he shouted. "You've done enough." Silence, then her reply softer. "Not until you're safe." It was madness. She was risking everything, but she wasn't flying for herself. She was flying for ghosts, for promises she could never undo. Finally, the last burst shattered the compound's defenses. Silence fell, smoke rose, the enemy broke and fled into the mountains. Brooks exhaled, sweat stinging his eyes. "Command Delta, compound neutralized. Request immediate extraction." "Copy Delta, birds inbound. Venom 17 RTB." But she didn't reply. Brooks's chest went cold. He scanned the sky until finally he saw it. Her hog limping, trailing smoke, its wing dipping unevenly. "Venom, respond." After a long pause, her voice returned, faint but resolute. "Still here, bringing her home." The extraction came swift. The SEALs lifted, leaving the smoldering compound behind. But Brooks's eyes never left the hog. He watched it stagger across the sky, wounded but unyielding, until it disappeared toward base. When they landed, Brooks went straight to the flight line. Her A-10 rolled in, battered, smoke still rising from its frame. Mechanics rushed forward. She climbed down slowly, her steps unsteady. Brooks caught her arm as she touched the ground. "You should be dead," he said harshly. She looked at him, eyes weary, voice hoarse. "But I'm not, and neither are you." He shook his head, frustration spilling over. "You can't keep doing this. One day the sky won't give you back." For the first time, her eyes softened. Not with pride, not with anger, but with something close to surrender. "Maybe that's the point, Commander. Maybe that's what I deserve." The words cut through him like a blade. Deserve. No one deserved death, but she believed it. He saw it in her face, in the hollow behind her calm. Brooks stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think flying like this is redemption, but it's not. It's a coin toss, and one day it's going to land wrong." She didn't answer, just looked at him, eyes tired, as if she had been carrying the weight of the dead so long she no longer knew how to put it down. That night, Brooks couldn't shake her words. "Maybe that's what I deserve." He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing something he hadn't before. Saving her wasn't just about keeping a pilot alive. It was about keeping a person from collapsing under the weight of her own ghosts. And for the first time, Brooks feared that the next mission wouldn't be about whether his team survived. It would be about whether Riley Carter let herself. What happens when the one who saves everyone else refuses to save herself? Brooks carried that question like a stone in his chest as the weeks bled together, mission after mission, call after call, and every time her voice came over the radio, his men felt relief. while he felt dread. Because he saw what they didn't, he saw the edge in her flying, the recklessness that wasn't recklessness at all, but something worse, a choice, a vow. Captain Riley Carter didn't just fly to keep them alive. She flew like she was daring the world to take her. And one day Brooks feared it would. The call came on a gray morning. Intelligence flagged a hidden convoy moving through a mountain pass. Supplies, weapons, maybe high-value leaders. Intercepting it was critical. Delta team would move in, strike, and extract. But it was the last line of the briefing that lodged in Brooks's mind. Air support, Venom 17 on station. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. His men heard that name and nodded, reassured, but Brooks felt the knot in his chest tighten. They launched before dawn, helicopters dropping them near above the pass. The convoy came hours later, trucks crawling along the dirt road, armored vehicles bristling with gunners, too many for 6 men to hit cleanly. Brooks keyed his mic. "Venom, this is Delta, visual on convoy, you on station." The reply came steady. "Copy Delta, I've got you in sight, say priorities." He exhaled slowly. The sound of her voice always steadied the team, but now to him it was another reminder. Every syllable might be the last. "Targets are lead and trail vehicles," Brooks said. "Cut the road, trap them in the kill box." "Copy, beginning run." Then came the roar, her hog dove out of the clouds, cannon thundering. The lead truck erupted in fire, shrapnel spinning into the air. She pulled up hard, banking into a sharp turn, then dove again. This time into the rear, dust and flame filled the pass. The convoy was trapped. The seals moved. Explosions echoed, gunfire cracked from every direction. The valley became chaos. Through it all, Carter circled above, diving and firing, threading passes so low Brooks swore he could feel the heat of her engines. "Delta, east flanks heavy," Martinez shouted. "Copy," Brooks said, then keyed his mic. "Venom, we're getting crushed on the east. Need cover." Her reply came instantly, "On it." She came screaming in, lower than ever, cannon bursts ripping into enemy positions, fighters scattered. But tracers clawed up at her, hundreds of rounds tearing the sky. Brooks's gut clenched, Venom break off too hot. But her voice stayed calm, "Not leaving you exposed." Then it happened. A plume of smoke burst from the NRPG. It streaked upward, twisting toward her hog. Brooks's heart stopped. "Venom, evade." The hog jerked violently, rolling hard. The rocket skimmed past, exploding against the cliff. Shrapnel rained. For a moment silence, then her voice. "Still here." But Brooks heard the strain in it, and he knew. One day she wouldn't be. The fight raged for nearly an hour. When it ended, the convoy was shattered, the road littered with burning wreckage. The SEALs pulled back, battered but alive, extraction inbound. Through it all, Carter's hog stayed overhead, circling, covering, refusing to leave until the last helicopter lifted clear. Back at base, Brooks went to the flight line again. He couldn't not. Her A-10 landed rough, gears screeching against the tarmac, smoke curled from its side, holes torn across its skin. When she climbed down, her face was pale, sweat dripping from her temples. "You're going to get yourself killed," Brooks said, voice low, firm. She pulled her helmet off, meeting his eyes. "Maybe that's what it takes." He stepped closer, anger edging into desperation. "No, what it takes is living long enough to keep doing this. You think dying proves something. It doesn't, it just robs the people who need you most." For a moment her eyes softened, filled with something like pain. Then she looked away. "You don't understand." Brooks's voice dropped. "Then help me make me understand." She hesitated. For a long moment she seemed like she might walk away, then, quietly. "First mission, Kandahar, team on the ground. I flew safe, too safe. By the time I cleared the target, they were gone. I told myself it was bad intel, bad timing, but the truth. I hesitated and 6 men didn't make it out." Her voice caught just slightly. "Their families will never know my name, but I know theirs, and I hear them every time I fly." Brooks swallowed hard. He wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that hesitation in combat was human, that she had been young, green, following procedure. But he saw it in her face. Those words would bounce off the armor she'd built. So instead, he said softly, "And if you die trying to make up for it, who carries you?" Her eyes flicked back to him. For the first time there was no mask, no armor, just raw exhaustion. No one, that's the point. Then she turned, walking into the night, leaving him standing there with the weight of her truth. That night Brooks sat with his men around a dim fire. They joked, laughed, tried to drown out the echoes of gunfire with cheap humor. But Brooks couldn't join in. His mind was on her words, that's the point. Noticed, as he always did, still thinking about the pilot, he said quietly. Brooks didn't answer. "You can't carry her weight for her," added. "No one can, but maybe you can remind her she doesn't have to carry it alone." Brooks stared into the flames, the reflection dancing in his eyes. He thought of the way she flew, the way she fought not just for them but against herself, and he knew was right. But how do you tell someone who defines herself by sacrifice that she's worth more than the ghost she carries? The answer didn't come that night or the next, but Brooks knew one thing. The war wasn't done with them, and the next mission might not give him time to find the words. Because one day soon, the sky wouldn't give her back. And he wasn't ready to lose her. How close can you fly to death before it finally reaches up and pulls you in? Brooks thought about that as he tightened his harness in the rattling helicopter. Another mission, another valley, another set of odds stacked so high they could bury them alive. And above it all, one constant, Venom 17. Her name was printed on the briefing slides, her call sign already penciled into the plan. To his men, it meant reassurance. To Brooks, it meant dread, because each mission brought her closer to the breaking point, and he knew, sooner or later, the sky wouldn't forgive her. The target was different this time. Not a convoy, not a compound, something bigger. An enemy command post buried into the mountainside, fortified with bunkers, tunnels, overlapping fields of fire. Intelligence warned of surface-to-air threats, man-portable air defense systems, SAMs that could bring down even the toughest bird if caught in the wrong angle. For the ground team, it meant hell. For Carter, it meant suicide. Yet when Brooks heard her voice check in, calm, steady, professional, he felt that same pull in his chest, relief and fear, tangled together until he couldn't tell one from the other. The insertion went bad from the start. Even before boots touched the ground, tracers arced into the sky, RPGs lit the cliffs. The landing zone became a furnace. The team scrambled, moving through dust and chaos, pinned before the mission even began. "Command, this is Delta," Brooks shouted, diving behind cover. "We are compromised at LZ. Heavy contact, multiple emplacements." "Delta, Venom 17 is one mic out," came the reply. "Hold position." Hold, always hold. Always wait for the impossible roar of her engines. Then it came. The Hog tore through the clouds, cannon thundering, enemy fire shredded as she dove, explosions lighting the slopes. She rolled, banked, dove again, threading passes so low Brooks felt the shockwave rattle his chest. But this time, the enemy was ready. A missile plume streaked into the sky, a shoulder-fired SAM, twisting toward her like a snake. "Venom, break, break!" Brooks screamed into his mic. The Hog jerked violently, rolling hard. The missile veered, detonating against the cliff in a bloom of fire. Shrapnel peppered her fuselage, sparks trailing for a heartbeat. Brooks thought it was over. But her voice came calm as ever, still flying. She dove again. Brooks swore under his breath. She wasn't pulling back, not even with missiles in the fight. She was pressing harder, angling, cutting her runs closer than ever. "Venom, pull to altitude," he barked. "They'll kill you if you stay low." Her reply was colder than steel. "If I go high, you're already dead." The battle raged, chaos layered upon chaos. The SEALs moved through smoke and fire. clearing positions, chasing their objective. Every step forward was bought by her fury in the sky. But then the sound Brooks feared most, a second missile streaking up. Venom missile inbound, brake right. The Hawk rolled too late. The missile clipped her wing, detonating in a flash. Smoke and fire erupted, the aircraft lurching, banking violently. Brooks's heart stopped. Venom report. Static, then her voice strained. Hit systems failing, still airborne. He closed his eyes, relief and terror colliding. She was alive, but barely. And still she turned back. Venom negative, Brooks shouted, his voice breaking. You're hit, RTB now, that's an order. Silence, then softer. If I leave, you don't make it out. And she dove again. The pass was insane. Lower than any he'd ever seen, smoke trailing from her crippled wing. The cannon roared, tearing through enemy positions, scattering fighters in panic. Jesus Christ, Stevens muttered beside him, staring at the sky. She's flying like she doesn't care if she comes back. Brooks didn't answer because Stevens was right, and it terrified him. For 30 minutes the battle raged. Carter's Hog limped and screamed, her passes reckless, suicidal, and yet precise enough to keep them alive. By the time the SEALs breached the command post, the mountainside was littered with fire and ruin. But Brooks didn't feel victory, he felt dread. Extraction was called. The SEALs moved to the LZ, battered but alive above them. Carter's Hog circled, trailing smoke, engines whining. Venom, this is Delta, objective secure. We're moving, you need to RTB, now. Her voice came faint, almost broken. Copy, holding until you're clear. No, Brooks snapped, his chest tight. You can't hold, you won't make it. Her silence stretched, then finally. I told you, Commander, I don't hesitate anymore. And in that moment, Brooks understood. She wasn't flying for survival. She was flying for absolution. The SEALs lifted, helicopters thundering into the night. Brooks sat inside, staring out the open door. He watched her Hog circle one last time, limping, bleeding smoke, before banking away toward base. He couldn't breathe until he saw her wheels touch the runway. The landing was rough, metal screeching, sparks trailing as the battered bird fought gravity. But she made it somehow, she made it. When she climbed down, her face was pale, her steps unsteady. Brooks caught her as she nearly fell, his hands gripping her shoulders. You're going to kill yourself, he said, voice shaking. Her eyes met his, tired but fierce. Maybe that's what it takes. No, Brooks said firmly. What it takes is living long enough to prove you don't have to die to be enough. For a moment, something shifted in her eyes, doubt, maybe, or the faintest flicker of hope. But then she pulled back, slipping from his grip, walking away into the floodlights. Brooks stood there, chest heaving, knowing one truth. The next mission would decide everything. Either she'd finally let herself live, or the sky would take her for good. How many times can you tempt fate before it finally answers? Brooks carried that question like a knife in his chest as dawn bled over the horizon. The desert stretched endless beneath the helicopter's blades, and for the first time in 12 years, he felt fear not just for himself, not just for his men, but for someone else entirely. Captain Riley Carter. Venom 17. The mission was urgent. Intelligence had pinpointed a high-value insurgent commander moving through the mountains with a heavily armed escort. Eliminating him could cripple operations in the entire region. But he wasn't moving alone. Reports estimated nearly 300 fighters, disciplined, trained, dug in. The kind of numbers that turned valleys into graves. Brooks's men were silent as they flew. Martinez checked his scope for the 10th time, polished the edge of his blade. Stevens muttered under his breath. The same prayer he always spoke before the fight. They all knew what was coming. But Brooks's mind wasn't on the enemy, it was on her. Because Carter was on the roster again, her call sign etched into the op plan like a promise. To his men, it meant hope. To Brooks, it meant dread. They landed miles from the convoy route, moving silently across broken ridges until the valley opened before them. Dust rose in the distance. Vehicles, dozens of them, crawling forward like a steel serpent. Fighters marched alongside, weapons ready. Brooks raised his hand, signaling positions. His men moved, taking cover, rifles steady. He keyed his mic. "Venom, this is Delta. Visual on convoy, you in the sky." Her reply came, calm but tired. "Copy, Delta. I've got eyes on, standing by for target priority." Brooks exhaled, relief threading through the fear. She was there, she always was. "Priority is lead and trail vehicles," he said. "Trap them, then focus on concentration's north ridge." "Copy, beginning run." The sound came seconds later. The roar of the hog diving from the clouds, cannon spitting fire. The lead truck erupted, shrapnel flying. She banked hard, cutting into the trail, trapping the convoy. Fighters scrambled, chaos erupting. The SEALs opened fire, striking from the precision bursts carving through confusion. Explosions echoed, the valley drowning in smoke. But the enemy adapted fast. They firing coordinated volleys, RPGs screaming overhead. Mortars thumped from the ridges. Explosions forcing Brooks's team into cover. "Delta, you're getting boxed in," Carter's voice cut in. "Hold, I'm making another pass." Brooks clenched his teeth. Hold, always wait for her fire to tear the sky. But this time, the enemy had prepared. From the north ridge, 2 missile plumes streaked upward, twisting toward her hog. "Venom, break!" Brooks screamed. The A-10 rolled, diving hard. 1 missile detonated in the air, shrapnel tearing past her wing. The second clipped her tail, erupting in flame. Brooks's chest went cold. "Venom, report." Static, then her voice strained but alive. "Hit, controls damaged, still flying." "Still flying, always still flying." "RTB," Brooks shouted. "That's an order, your hit, pull out." But her reply was soft. "Not leaving you, Commander." And she dove again. The pass was reckless, insane. Her hog screamed so low Brooks swore her wings cut the treetops. The cannon thundered, tearing into enemy positions, scattering fighters, but the aircraft shuddered, smoke trailing thick, alarms shrieking faintly over the comm. "Venom, stop." Brooks's voice broke raw. "You don't have to die for this." For the first time her voice cracked. "I already did, Brooks, a long time ago." The words gutted him. But she wasn't done. She rolled again, banking sharp, diving back into the valley. Her cannon tore another swath through enemy fighters, carving open the corridor the SEALs needed to move. "Go," she shouted over comms. "Move now." Brooks signaled, his men sprinting through the chaos, weaving between fire and smoke, every step bought by her fury above. Extraction birds thundered in, rotors chopping the air. The SEALs scrambled aboard, hauling the captured commander with them. Brooks was the last to climb in, his eyes never leaving the sky. Her hog limped overhead, smoke trailing, wings trembling. "Venom," he said into his mic, voice low, desperate. "We're clear, it's over, come home." Silence stretched, then finally her reply. "Copy, Delta on RTB." The helicopter lifted, carrying them away. Brooks pressed his headset, listening to her engine's ragged roar until it faded into static. Back at base, the flight line was chaos. Her A-10 came in heavy, sparks showering as it skidded across the tarmac, metal screaming against concrete. Emergency crews rushed forward. For a moment, Brooks thought she wouldn't make it. But the hog groaned to a stop. The canopy cracked and she climbed out, helmet under one arm, movement steady despite the smoke curling from her bird. Brooks was there before anyone else. He grabbed her arm as her boots hit the ground, his voice shaking. "You nearly didn't come back." Her eyes met his, weary but unbroken. "But I did." He swallowed hard, emotion choking his throat. "Why? Why keep pushing until there's nothing left?" She looked at him then, not as Venom 17, not as the fearless pilot his men saw, but as Riley Carter, just Riley. Her voice was quiet, raw. Because if I don't, then who am I? Brooks held her gaze, his chest heavy, then, softly, he said the only words that mattered. You're enough. You always were, even before the cannon, even before the "don't let the ghosts tell you otherwise." For a moment, something shifted in her eyes, the armor cracked, the silence broke, and for the first time, Brooks saw not just the pilot, not just the vow, but the person beneath, the one who had carried too much for too long. She didn't answer, not with words, but her shoulders eased, just slightly, as if the weight had lightened, if only for a moment. Months later, Brooks would still remember that mission. Not the explosions, not the captured commander, not the valley they left in ruin. But her voice cracked but steady. I already did, Brooks, a long time ago. And he would remember the way she came back anyway. Because sometimes redemption isn't found in dying for others. Sometimes it's in living, despite the ghosts that tell you not to. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.